Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Not Another Tooling Podcast with myself, Austin Pearson, and my wonderful co-host, Mr. Matt Malcolm. How are you today, Matt?
Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good. New start to the year. We're easily a month in. That's flown by, hasn't it? Like, where did that go? Like, blink
Certainly.
and it's now February.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you watching this later, which will be all of you, it's February the 5th. So we've just been through the longest month of the year, January, and it actually feels a little bit spring-like this morning. I've got to say, it was a bit warmer when I was out for my run this morning. It was light, so it was good.
Yeah, man.
Right, today we are talking about a discussion that has been ongoing for donkey's years, which is should you buy new tools or should you build tools? And the two areas I've seen this really have some serious impact is one, monitoring tools tends to be fairly specific domains, but there are people who've built things, across the whole stack, and automation as well. So let's start with monitoring. And why on earth would you want to build something yourself, Matt?
I mean, there's loads of answers there, isn't there? I suppose. And this might change more so rapidly over the next, I don't know, few years for us. I think control. There's probably a myriad of subsections for it, but control, like with what we see happen in the enterprise tooling space from a sales and a vendor and a marketing perspective, I can see the biggest benefit of just doing it yourself is control, and then disseminate that level of control as we see fit, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Just expand on that a little bit for our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by control there?
So if you're building it yourself, you're going to be better able to align what you really need versus having extra stuff that you don't need. You'll be able to trim the fat because you'll be designing it for the very purpose you need it. Like, how many products do we know in the estate, in the world, that have 55 features and customers are using 5? Pretty extreme example there, but that is definitely a common scenario we see, for sure. So instead of it being driven by what the vendor thinks is best and you're having more product than that's needed, you build what you need based upon what you need. So you're able to have a bit more of a lean product set to achieve what you need versus plenty of stuff and features and gadgets and whizzes sitting on the shelf. That's one.
Interesting.
But coupled to that, which is probably the most obvious one, and I did see a really good article talking about this, not for tooling necessarily, but as a broad sense, is cost control, man. Like, just cost control. Yeah, we know we'll get talking to about it in a minute, but we know we're going to have a rigmarole of managing and supporting these things and the operability and all the rest of it. But gosh, depending on the product sets you're using, and this isn't a use case for all products, right? But for some, it's going to be much more financially viable for you to go through the effort and the pain to build something and then run it yourself than it is to essentially tie yourself in with a vendor you can never get away from, and you're kind of stuck renewing at 10-15% increases each year and more, all the rest of it. So yeah, so those are the two areas I think I can start on. Maybe we could talk a bit more, but those would be, if I was making a decision, if I was recommended to somebody, it would be control around what you're actually using, what you're actually building, and then significantly related, the cost control.
Interesting. Yeah. I think the other things I've seen is people believing they have a lot of technical requirements that are not available in tools that they've looked at. So I guess a lack of features, or a perceived lack of features or functionality. Which is why people built some various tools. And I think those are probably the big the big three, aren't they? Also, actually, I do one other one is job protection.
Um, yeah. Oh, are we in that? Are we in that? Is that happened? Still, is someone?
I think it used to happen, and
Yeah.
I think there are some areas of IT where it does still happen. Like, well, you can't really get rid of us because we built all this stuff and the company runs on it. And
You know where I see that more, and I do understand where you're coming from. Where I see that more is external agencies and stuff into businesses. So maybe not mention any names, but customers that have a relationship with an outsourced partner,
mm,
and that partner has built this custom app, not tool, some custom app for whatever the service is. Well,
yeah,
this external party has no vested interest in the customer self-enabling and buying some off the shelf. So they want this custom app to be as complicated and as messy as possible. So they always have to feed and water it from the external agency. That's where I've seen it more so over the last decades, and even still like now, that's like more relevant. The other scenario, like you put on the table there about people wanting to protect their jobs, I think it's like people actually, maybe I could be wrong, but just observations, care more about the business, and they'd be doing it based upon it's a better decision for the business and for my employer if we create our own thing, almost like selfless move versus job protection.
right,
But the job protection piece, I can see that, but from history, I haven't seen lots of it.
yeah.
But I'm not in those level of conversations all the time. But where I can see it most is the external agency protecting themselves versus an individual.
Well, yeah, I think I'm seeing it a bit more in the automation space these days because people are building these huge automation teams and whatever. And what are these people doing? They're doing things that are generally available off the shelf somewhere else, but they're building them all and maintaining them all themselves and creating their own little empires, I think. But okay, all right. So that's why people build stuff. What about the pros of buying stuff? And then we'll dive into the cons of all this stuff.
The cons of buying stuff.
No, why would you buy something? And we've just done the why you would build it. So why would you buy it?
Depends on the stage of the business, doesn't it? So it's like the path of least resistance. You know, what is the business model? Some organizations, you've definitely seen this, where their full model is, well, we don't want anything. We want to outsource everything with all SaaS based, which want to earn a subscription to these things, and we want the ability to connect all these things up so they work harmoniously. So for those kind of organizations, absolutely they're not interested in building their own tools, because probably even the applications they use to leverage their business operation are already leveraged products or SaaS products.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a business model type fit on why you would or wouldn't for sure. And then it's the like ability to do so as well. So they might have the aspiration they might want to do it, but they haven't really got the ability to do it themselves. That right now, well, there's a rigmarole then of bringing in that capability to then build it or outsource it temporarily. But then it introduced lots of complexity. But I kind of see where the most where I think it would take place is where an organization is future proofing themselves. That's where I can see it really happening, because if you're looking at a product and you're seeing the unit price is X, whatever it is, doesn't really matter, and
Yeah.
that X is going to grow, your company's going to quadruple over 2 years, 4 years, okay, and you're looking at this going to be a huge operational expense at this point, then it might make sense to make a strategic decision to go, now, at the rate we're going to scale, based on what they're planning on, it will be financially viable to build something ourselves and not take that hit on that license and stuff like that in the future. Like, it could be a very long-term strategic decision, basically, is what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, interesting. Put that down on the build. And I think the other piece is I don't know if this is, I'm gonna call it perceived speed of buying something versus building it.
That's a very, very good statement, isn't it? Perceived speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool. So I I will put my hands up and say I am absolutely on the buy side. Surprise, surprise. I've worked for vendors for a very long time, but I've also seen a lot of customers get into a lot of trouble with what they've built themselves because over time you tend to lose the skill set and you also don't realize how much time and effort it does take to maintain stuff because the minute a vendor changes something that you're monitoring, you have to then change some some things that you're doing with that. So let's say a new version of Cisco iOS comes out or whatever. Yeah. Oh, right. Now you can't get access to it through this, and you need to go via APIs and blah 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 blah. And or there's this new function we've just come out, and now you need to go write some code to go do that. Whatever. I think it depends on the size of your business and the sort of business that you have for sure. But
Yep.
certainly the bigger your business is, the harder this is to do. And my experience has been it's the big businesses who've got big IT departments that are like, yeah, we've been out and we can't find the functions we need, so we're going to build it ourselves. And then they end up with this huge monolith that they then can't replace because they are monitoring everything under the sun that no product in the world would ever do because they don't actually need half the stuff. But they've built it and then they've got this huge team supporting it and they kind of get a little bit stuck. And one of those had a big outage and their tool failed them and some of their team that wrote the tool had left since and they were pretty screwed because they just didn't have the knowledge left in the bank to be able to kind of fix it in a decent amount of time. And they had no visibility into their network because their tool was down and their network went down at the same time, which is very, very rare. And they were just like, they were in a nightmare situation.
I mean, the areas you're going in, and just to be clear, I'm not like adverse to buy or build. Like, obviously, we've been on the thick end of buy, but for a lot of time. But the issues you're calling out there are like operability, right?
Yeah.
So the organization needs to be pretty lean on how they operate their tech stack before even considering building something themselves. It's a nice fairy tale to go build it based on the core requirements you got and all the money you'll save, but if you haven't got that operating model to support it, and not just like right away, but the future. What about when Frank and Joe and Jeffrey retire? I'm not sure why they were all called Jay then, but sounded right. Then what happens then? Who's the succession? Who do they hand over to? So there needs to be much more like operability consideration for people building it. And not to say it can't be done, but there's probably a certain kind of ilk, isn't there? Setting aside the notion it could be a strategic position for doing it or not doing it.
Yeah.
There needs to be like the ilk of that kind of appetite for doing that in the business in the first place. So where I'd see it happening more often than not is organizations that have already reined in their own application stack builds versus outsourcing it or SaaS-based products.
Yes.
So they'll already have this degree of like operability considerations on how we build, how we test, how we dev, how we run, etc., how we train people up. So you'd have to have that well-oiled machine in place before you even considered it, which is a lot of organizations isn't the case. They're happy just to leverage the off-the-shelf SaaS products to build their services. The same for the SaaS products that support the tools or the tools that support the SaaS products. So there's like, it's almost like a culture decision at the same time as like, oh, can you do it?
Yeah. If you were a software company already, then actually you should be pretty good at this stuff, right? And therefore doing it shouldn't necessarily be an issue for you. But yeah, you're right. You've got to culturally be in the right place to be able to do this, and really understand what you're getting into over the long term.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that probably differs slightly. It's interesting what we're seeing in the automation world with this, because I'm seeing a lot of customers going the Ansible route and then writing their own Ansible playbooks, and then trying to support them themselves and things. And it's a really it's interesting because the whole kind of precursor to that was Chef and Puppet, where actually there was quite a good open source community around those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had this sort of community support rather than necessarily relying on your own people. Whereas now in the Ansible world, it seems it's much more customized for every individual client, and they seem to be supporting it themselves versus using that kind of open source community piece,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which leads you into this this kind of trouble challenge again potentially.
You know, I don't know if this is considered middle ground, but the organizations that don't necessarily need to make the build or buy decision are the ones that can look like objectively at the capability requirements that we need. And then it doesn't even matter, right? So that some of the rabbit holes and problems that people face is they get wed to a particular product, and it's not even a capability. And it's like we need that product, whatever the name or the buzzword is. It's that product, and that's where I would see the pain. I have seen, do see the pain where it's like you're stuck with them and you're having to pay the renewals and what's this charge we didn't expect and all the normal stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
if they've gone at it from the beginning and maintain their to add, we need the capability and also constantly looking at the market where those capabilities can be fulfilled. And it doesn't really matter then. They could just flick to another product relatively easily, and the operability side just carries on running because it's a feature, it's a function, it's a capability. But you don't see that. You don't see that loads. I don't see it loads. Once maybe people start off with the right intentions, capability, we need these features and functions, capability,
Yep.
and then over some time, very good vendor relationships, it becomes a product strategy and a product roadmap and a versus capability. But if they can be strict at the beginning by splitting out the capability and then maintaining its capability requirements, it doesn't matter if they buy or build. They just need to make sure that the thing fits right for them, whether that's the operability, the cost, the X, Y, Z. But maybe that's just a observation that could help.
I totally 100% agree with you, Matt. This is something that we talk about so much, and I think this is where, when you look at the sorts of businesses that I've talked about that have got in trouble with building their own stuff, is they never looked at what the real business requirements were and understood what the problem was they were trying to solve. They were very much, here's a list of technical things that we think we need a tool to do. Oh, I can't see those in the market. Right, I'm going to build it all myself. And then you get in you eventually get in a mess. But this is always the starting point for every kind of project like this, and that is what we're trying to achieve. Why do we need to do it? What difference is it going to make to the bottom line of our business if we do that? You often get this, and I know that you will have been through this many times when you go and look at somebody's implementation of monitoring, for example. They've got so many things turned on of their monitoring, because once in 1974 they had an issue with an AS400 doing this, and now that's core and they monitor it every day, and somebody gets up and checks it every morning, yet they've never had ever had a problem since with it. And then you just build out these things or these capabilities in your existing tool, and you just end up with this huge behemoth that is unsupportable, like you said. And
maybe though, maybe And just like reiterating my general acknowledgement of like the really strong up and coming mid market in most capabilities, the rate of being able to do things is increased because technology's moved on so far that you don't need to just wait for the product off the shelf. You could build it yourself. But likewise, there's lots of other products that could also fit it. So the options are like this broad now, right? Versus depending on the capability, we're probably like here. So maybe people are just spoiled for choice anyway, and whether it's build or buy, generally the technology in a position where that barrier is easier. I'm not just stuck with a single or two vendors. I could build it myself because I can build it with components. I could build my own product capability based upon bolting 6 capabilities together, and that achieves it. That's my ecosystem. I've seen people going crazy with Power Apps, full-on solution replacements with Power Apps for a relatively simple barrier for entry. So the build buy scenario might be less of a barrier to go through now because loads of options to buy, many more, and it's growing and the market's competitive in almost all areas.
Yeah.
And building is just a lot easier because I haven't got to net new build something. I could bolt a few things together, be that little blend of buy and build. So maybe we'll see a lot more of it.
Yeah. For sure. I think we will. Especially as you got a lot more kind of tech savvy youngsters coming up who were born in AWS or whatever it is, and they're used to just grabbing a few clever things, chucking them together, and away you go. I definitely think we'll see that. I think also going back to our point a minute ago about understanding what the business requirements are, I think a lot of the times where I've seen people build has been in very niche scenarios. Whereas actually, if they'd have taken a step back and had a chat to the business about, what are we trying to do? Oh, actually, we're trying to improve our MTTR because our customers are getting annoyed because they're not being able to get their quotes fast enough on our website, for example. Whereas they might look at a problem of, well, I'm in the network team and we always get blamed in the network team for everything, and we can't see this and this and that, and I can't see anything, so we're gonna go build it. When actually, if they took a step back and all had that discussion together and then look through the data and say, well, actually, do you know what? It's rarely the network. Actually, most of the time it's this and blah, blah, blah. And that bigger picture, I think, would perhaps stop people getting in some of these holes. I think, but right, we've talked a lot. I'm sure we could talk for quite a while on this, by the sounds of it. So we were talking about buy versus build decisions today. And we talked about why people build, which was aligning with what you need. You don't have to buy all these features and functions that you don't necessarily need. Cost control. You're not in the hands of a vendor. Perceived lack of features and functionality in tools out there, potentially a bit of job protection, and maybe even a long-term cost decision. Versus buying a tool is often the path of least resistance. A lot of businesses want to outsource everything that isn't core to their business. Maybe they don't have the skills to do it. And there's also the perceived speed of buying something as well. But then we talked through that, well, actually, you need to start in the right place in the first place. You really need to understand what you're trying to achieve as a business and look at that from a much broader perspective, understand your data, start in the right place. And then actually, if your business is lean and is good with something like software development, then perhaps build might be right for you, but you've got to be in the right place for that. But as long as you've got a very good handle on what you're trying to do and you're keeping it there as you evolve, then build versus buy either could work for you depending on how lean you are as a business and how good you are at controlling things, because you don't want to get into an operational position where you've lost people and you're spending more time looking after your tool than you are running your business. Fair summary?
Good summary. Just a quick one then before we break.
Mm.
Build or buy?
I would say 95% of the time it's going to be buy for me. What about you?
My head tells me buy because there's so much options, but my heart and like interest says build.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get it. And it's one interesting thing I find is that actually it's quite interesting to build stuff, right? You get
Yeah, that's it.
an end product
Why do we
out.
work in this industry? We don't want to be bored by the same vanilla stuff off the shelf. How interesting, and yes, complex, but interesting, which is an important part when you're spending 8, 10 hours a day doing it. So that's what my heart is more like build, because we should know enough stuff to be able to build something well, and it'll be more interesting. Anyway.
Yeah, good stuff. Right. Thank you very much, Matt. And thank you to all of our listeners. Be really interested in your feedback on this one. I suspect it'll be a hotly discussed topic, where you'll have many different views on this. As always, if you've got any topic you would like us to discuss, or you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, then please drop either Matt Malcolm or myself, Austin Pearson, a message, or leave a comment on this video, and we'd love to have you on. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.